Hi, everyone, and welcome. It's Nigel Polak here. The date is the 19th of February 2024. I'm the current president of PACFA, and I'm talking to Ron Perry, who was the second president of PACFA from around 2007 to 2010. Thanks for joining me, Ron.
Okay.
I'll do a quick acknowledgement of country, so I'll just acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands upon which we're both sitting and pay my respects to their elders, past and present. So today, Ron, we're just talking about your experience as PACFA's president and before and after. If there are those years, I'm doing these interviews as a way of capturing the history of PACFA for posterity. And so I really want to thank you for your time today.
Oh, no, well, I'm pleased to, and I'm actually a bit excited about it because I think it was great, especially a lot of that early stuff, especially. We'll talk about how and why. And yeah, I'm glad that you're remembering it and in some form or other recording it.
Mm. Yeah, good. Hopefully this will be of use for future generations of PACFA members and PACFA presidents and psychotherapists and counsellors in Australia. So I think the starting point is to begin with your life and career. If you're happy to give us a sort of a pre-PACFA background of how it was that, what it was about your upbringing in your life and the context of that sort of led you to even contemplating being part of an association for psychotherapists and counsellors.
Well, sticking to the parts that are mostly relevant, I think. I was a high school teacher for the first, whatever it was, 15 years of my working life. But I was asked to do something, to study and lecture in something different. And then I was told that I would be helping with people that were studying at university and preparing for school teacher training and so forth. So I really asked to be able to study counselling. Not that I knew anything about it at the time, but I thought I'll need to, if I'm going to be involved with university student people, I'll need to learn some counselling. So I got interested then in that counselling, which was, I can't say that there was some kind of great insight. It was simply that I'll need this, whatever this is. And there wasn't much of it around. So that's what happened. And then I did some, what was then fairly beginning studies in counselling. I did it in New York. So there were some different experiences that you might have. I was talking to one, what shall we say? Well, I suppose, how old was he? I suppose he was 14 or 15 or so. But he was talking to me about, he was from the black neighborhood, and he talked about various people, and it was quite common for him to say he's got a gun. That was a bit new for me, but anyway, and it didn't last because eventually that particular whatever he was, client, decided he didn't want to come anymore. So anyway, all of that was my introduction to counselling. I was part of the Catholic Church organization, so I was doing some work for training for them. And as a result of that, there was at that stage, what are we talking? We're talking the late 60s, early 70s in the last century. when it was also the time of huge social change. So we're living at a time of huge social change, and that included, you know, changes in structure and changes in training and all of that. So excuse me. So what happened was that the advisory body to the Bishop of Sydney, Archbishop, I suppose he was, were asked by what is now Catholic Family Welfare, or it even has a different name, I think now. But the official church body that was caring for the unwell, what we call mental health these days, they were asked to set up a counselling training program. And because I'd had some training in counselling, I was invited to be on that study group. And we didn't know what was happening, but the counselling that was known was in what was called Catholic Family Welfare Bureau, so they provided therapy and social support, that kind of thing, so a couple of their specialists joined this group, and then there was a psychiatrist and a couple of people that were just were invited to join. So we did, and the meeting got together, and, you know, gradually we worked out a structure for what became called the Institute of Counselling. And the Institute of Counselling was therefore originally a kind of Catholic organisation that was going to not so much train counsellors as train teachers and nurses in support that might then lead on to counselling. So that was how it was back then, and there wasn't much counselling around, of course, and the word psychotherapy would be mentioned, you know, in whispers almost, because psychotherapy was more or less under the analytic group, you know. So there were those that had trained to be psychoanalysts of various descriptions, and they really managed, you know, insofar as there was anything, they managed psychotherapy. And if you wanted to talk about psychotherapy, it was usually the analytic language that you were using.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, we got to there, and then we had to structure a course and work out a staff without sort of money or anything, any of that kind of. But the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau gave us an office for a while and a little bit of secretarial help, and gradually we developed what would be a syllabus for an Institute of Counselling, and then the quite extraordinary, in retrospect, the quite extraordinary aspect of that was that who was going to lecture? Well, the answer to that is that the Catholic Family Welfare Bureau people obviously connected with other therapists, counsellors, psychologists, social workers around about. So they actually knew who was, and there weren't many calls like this. There was a counselling course at the University of Sydney. There was one at University of New South Wales. There was no Macquarie University at that stage, so we're back into. Oh, well, sorry, but the the thing that was significant there was that the people they suggested were all leading people in their field. But what that meant was that they'd give 1 or 2 lectures. They wouldn't do a whole program such as you might expect, but and so the syllabus became a series of lectures by leading people, which in retrospect was huge, because it meant that people were mostly inspired, but then the other bit that arrived with that really was that a couple of the Catholic family welfare people that had been trained in a certain amount of the analytic work or the psychotherapeutic work, they said, well, you have to have groups. You've got to have the presentation, and then you've got to discuss them. You've got to have groups to discuss them. So a course was worked out, which was this mixture of lectures. There were a few key people who presented a lot, but by and large, they were specialist people. For instance, as an example, there was somebody who did the life story, and the different stages of that from a psychological point of view. But somebody then at one stage said we had to introduce family therapy. So we'd have some specialist come in and give 1 or 2 lectures on family therapy, or it might be a weekend. Anyway, but I describe all that to say that was the Institute of Counselling, and that was me, the director of the Institute of Counselling. So when the thought went around some of the universities, I suspect, or some of the training programs, we need to get together. We need to talk about this. We need to see what's actually going on. Yeah. So the Institute of Counselling that I was part of started back in the very early 1970s. But what we're talking here is basically from the University of New England that needs to get mentioned, that the University of New England had a number of they had a training program in counselling, which was partly that we'd say on video these days, but then it was whatever you called it, when you went to the university occasionally. So and the 2 of the people that were on the staff there, Hugh Crago and Ruth somebody, thought that there was the needed to be more clarity about counselling, and so they tried to invite most of the people that were leading counselling training programs. So that was where I came in. I was one of those, but people came from various universities and from some also private providers, so that the University of New England is inviting leading people who are running counselling training programs from around most of Australia, as I remember it. People got together, and the question at that time was, can anybody be a counsellor? Because in sort of legally, the short answer is yes. Did they use psychotherapy at that stage? Well, I'm not too sure, but it eventually came up. But so there was the first meeting in which people talked about syllabus and talked about recognition and all of that. So in the background, you've got psychologists and social workers mainly, who have training programs and accreditation programs. But there was nothing like that for counseling, and certainly not for psychotherapy. So so Hugh Crago led the groups in that first year, and then there was an agreement that we'd have another meeting in a year's time, and that we'd search out more people. And so over that year, they did search out more people, and that they included this time the psychoanalytic group, as well as the counseling training groups. And it was like, we need to talk together about what's required, what are the steps, what does accreditation mean, all of that kind of thing. Hugh withdrew at that stage, and somebody gave my name to the organizers as a possible leader facilitator. So I became the facilitator of the group, and it was a very inspiring group, all of whom in different ways were running training programs in counseling, then I think about then we started to say, and in psychotherapy. So I became the facilitator there, and I facilitated those meetings over, I don't know how many years, but certainly quite a number of years. And I should just, somewhere here you talked about mentioning names, and I'll try mostly not to mention names, because when you bring some in, you leave some out, and that's.
I was hoping you would mention lots of names, because otherwise that history will get lost.
Well, I'll try to mention names, not probably today, but maybe in another sort of. But I'm hesitant to mention names that are. I mean, I'll mention names, like we mentioned Professor Ione Lewis, because she had various roles. Margot Schofield, I was going to mention, because she had particular roles in terms of accreditation training and all that, and her particular role and contribution was significant.
And you've already mentioned Hugh Crago and Ruth, though we can't.
Yeah.
The surname. So you were facilitating those meetings over a few years.
Over a number of years, yes.
Hugh sort of withdrew a little. I
should mention that towards the end, I had another a lady who was a nun, actually, Sister Margaret McGovern, assisted and I mention her simply because she was part of that facilitation, and also because I think she was involved with the eventual the picture that I have of the group sitting together. There were about 30 of us, I think, and we were talking about what we'd call it, and it would be counseling, and it would be psychotherapy, and it would be psychotherapy, and it would be counseling, and until eventually we came up with the Psychotherapy and Counseling Federation of Australia, but there was that kind of facilitated group excitement that eventually came out with a name and began then to prepare a structure. And it included quite a number of representatives from the analytic movement, and so that there were people running lengthy programs at some universities, people running little private provider kinds of things, And so there was quite an exciting group of people that were, and they were excited with each other, like the analysts, of course, at one level, were only used to talking to analysts. So it really took, and in fairness to them, the counselling training and so on weren't talking to the analytic people either. So there was that kind of linking and excitement, group work, different perspectives, etc. So
so then how did things develop from there? That sounds exciting. People were being connected. There was a fair bit of effort involved over a number of years. You ended up leading the facilitation of that group. It sounds like you were there as the name was brainstormed and set upon. What else was the flavour of those initial meetings, and how did things start to take shape, and then talk us through how they in fact did take shape?
Well, insofar as I can remember details and that kind of thing, I wasn't able to look up history at that stage. Anyway, well, I suppose what happened then was, what's the agenda? And the agenda, became, what needs to get recognized, what training do we need to, what amount of training is necessary, and what needs to be part of, group work was one of the questions. But so gradually, the goal was to work out, accreditation requirements for counselling and psychotherapy. Like at one level, even in more recent years, it's still happening. There's PACFA has if I understand correctly, PACFA has a group for psychotherapy, or what's it called? It's not called a group.
A college. We have a college of psychotherapy and a college of counselling, and a college of creative and experiential therapies, and a college of relationship counselling, and a college of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander healing practitioners now. Yeah.
Well, in other words, the PACFA is still working with these different aspects of counselling and psychotherapy, one thing that happened that I think was somewhat sad, but as we were trying to put things together and agree on accreditation requirements and all that kind of thing, the Brisbane group, what's it called, Australian Counselling Association, I think, isn't it, ACA? They decided not to join, and I think that was unfortunate in lots of ways, but that's where listening to different groups didn't quite work. We didn't quite manage to get something that everybody wanted to join.
And do you know what that was about? Do you know why? Was it called the ACA at the time? What was it called? And do you know why they decided not to join? Was there any engagement, interaction, conversation around that?
Well, I'm a bit prejudiced because I think, just be careful how you do this, but I think it was unfortunate that they made that decision. It seemed to be, you'd have to ask them that, but it seemed to me that it was a business process. They were part of a business organization, and they didn't want to. They wanted to run that their way, and so that divergence that still has existed to some extent, because we've still got that whatever it's called, the kind of joint recognition accreditation group.
There's an Australian Register of Counsellors and Psychotherapists, which is the joint register of the ACA and PACFA's and PACFA's members.
So that was one, and then the second thing that happened was that PACFA, PACFA as it was then, began to set standards and requirements and supervision and that kind of thing. And one of the analytic groups from interstate, when I say interstate, I probably should have said that the organization was set up in Melbourne, basically. I'm not, and I was thinking today, why was that? I'm not quite sure why that was, except that there were groups, there were more groups united in Melbourne.
Are you talking about PACFA now, Ron? Or are you talking about another association?
No, I'm talking about I'm talking about how PACFA, and of course, like, there wasn't money or anything like that. So
because PACFA is incorporated in the ACT. Did you know that?
Yeah. Well,
so I was just trying to draw the connection between what you're talking about. I think it's had its offices in Victoria or in Melbourne the whole time.
Yeah,
but it's actually incorporated in the ACT.
But that was a legal requirement of some description, I think.
Mm-hmm.
I forget the details of the legalities, but to actually get incorporated in a united sort of way, it needed the ACT to be in the ACT, I think. Anyway, I enjoyed being part of the whatever you call it, the creative bit of PACFA. I wasn't so good on the organization, so some of the organizational stuff I wouldn't be too clear about. But what's unfortunately then what happened was that the analysts decided that this gradually in small groups and then in other groups, that this wasn't quite for them. So they set up their own organization, and the psychotherapy, well, we'll call it PACFA. PACFA lost them, and that has complicated things too. But in some ways, that was the history. The history was that the analysts tended to see themselves a bit separate from everybody else. See, I was inclined to say that, look, psychology, social work don't own counselling. They've got a place, they have a structure and all that, but they don't necessarily own counselling and psychotherapy. So, the goal of PACFA was probably to get psychotherapy and counselling accredited in a way that would be recognised, and remembering that the social workers and the psychologists were ahead of us. They were around, and they were much more organised and had their requirements fairly clear. So there was, an ongoing negotiation. But the psychologists and social workers kept separate all the same. But because and like they had their own, understandably, they had their own definitions of their reality, existence, and their entities. it became PACFA's task to define some of those things for counselling and psychotherapy. And the crisis is still there. That like the analysts have requirements of I don't know how many years, but it's a considerable number of years of training, and yet a lot of people want to do counselling and psychotherapy without doing that much training, and that kind of pull both ways is still there, and still has to be carefully negotiated.
Absolutely, that's ongoing.
Yeah, that's absolutely ongoing. But I haven't been connected with PACFA for a while very much, except that I've remained on the or in the whatever you call it in the membership.
So you receive news and updates and
yeah
what's happening. So if we go back, so there was the decision made to establish PACFA, and sounds like there may be a slightly greater number of training organisations in Victoria. So Melbourne was chosen as the base, though the incorporation occurred in the ACT for reasons that you're not sure about. What was your involvement in those early years? Were you involved in the beginning? Did you become a board director? You eventually became president. What was your experience of PACFA in those early years? And if you do remember that that made a significant impact, the CEO, the other board members, other people who were making a significant impact, please feel free to share.
Yeah. Well, I probably don't. I'd probably need the paperwork to be clear about a lot of that. But the eventually, and I'm not even sure of the year exactly, but it was something like 1995 or somewhere there that PACFA got set up, and then began to work on recognition, accreditation, and achieving recognition, and that's still happening. I haven't had, as I said, much to do with PACFA, but I had a conversation with Joanna in the last few months, and clearly she is still working for accreditation, recognition, acknowledgement, all that. And she's getting the voice heard, with politicians, with related people, that kind of thing.
It's remarkable how the work is so similar to the work that you initially commenced in the late 1990s. So what do you remember of those years? It sounds like it was about organising training standards and accreditation of training providers, and maybe some advocacy as well. Like, what's your recollection of your years? And so you were a board director, and then you became president. And what stands out?
What basically what happened was that again, I wouldn't get the details accurate because you need the paperwork to do that. And one of the questions that I'm sure we'll finish with is, what are the archives of PACFA that are there? And because I'm not sure how that all worked, but like what happened fundamentally was that people agreed. There was a committee set up which agreed to meet every so often, every few months, and I still remember getting on planes to Melbourne over quite some time, meeting and taking what we were doing a step further. Trying to keep people together. And, you know, like the same thing was going on. Like there were some people that were leading, you know, master's programs at universities in counseling, less in psychotherapy, but that was there. And there were those that were more individual people going to a training program and looking for recognition. And so, yes, so there was, and then Jim Crawley was elected as the first president. I don't, not even sure, but that was easily agreed on. And I certainly was on the committee for, and that went on for 2 or 3 years until Jim decided, he was in Perth at the time, and he thought he couldn't continue to do that. So he, as I remember it, he withdrew, I think, or, you know, or finished, and I was the vice president. So, but then, you know, and I was certainly very committed to that recognition of counselling, but it was a complicated struggle because, you know, there were all those different levels of involvement and levels of demand. And, you know, like that was one of the differences with ACA, that, you know, they had their levels of demand or whatever it was, and we had ours.
Do you mean like levels of registration or accreditation, that like different standards for different levels?
Yeah. Well, what do you require? Like the Australian Register that you referred to, you know, what do you require to be able to call yourself a counsellor or a psychotherapist? Well, we never quite got to that. I don't think we've got to that yet. But because it's got to get recognised at the political level as well as at the level of the fellow professionals.
Exactly. Okay. Anything else that you want to share around those years as president? Any other key people involved or key achievements that come to mind?
Well, my sense of that is that I need to look for the details, but B, that there were these different levels. Like I'm thinking of the level of the Institute of Counselling. We had to, at that institute, you know, we had to go through various levels of accreditation at university level, at below university level, but then there were 2 or 3 other training programs. Like I was also part of the family therapy training program in Sydney, you know, and we were just there. They were behind in terms of that, but they were starting to get this amount of training, this amount of recognition, this amount of this level of training, and at the same time, you know, the bodies that were dealing with accreditation were just getting formed in the, you know, politically. So it was how are we keeping those groups together while recognizing different levels, like as there's still going on, that there's still, you know, recognizing what level is acceptable, what level is, you know, and you know, gradually with, you know, the whole move towards assisting with mental health issues, where does counselling fit there? Well, psychology was way ahead, so that Medicare, for instance, you know, refers to psychologists, but not to counsellors, psychotherapists, social workers. Well, a little bit to social workers.
And that all happened that was all happening at around the time that PACFA was, or soon after PACFA was being established.
Yeah, those sort of things were happening together, and it was, yeah, some of it was well, like one of the what shall we say, complicated decisions was around the GST, because in whatever it was, I think it was the year 2000, you know, that the GST was announced, and that had some importance because the negotiations with Medicare involved GST, that was one of the complications, and the psychologists were organized for that, and got recognized, you know, by Medicare, where and I think you'd find if you looked up the actual dates that that was an important point that I remembered, and I won't get the details totally correct, but the Medicare, the GST rather, came in approximately to year 2000, and in the requirements for health, there were a couple of groups that got in and were involved with GST by various little bits of accidents. There are stories in there, but somewhere there is a story about how these people got admitted with GST and these people didn't.
There's a list of health professions that qualify as being able to be GST free, and at the current assessment of the Australian Taxation Office, psychotherapists and counsellors, registered or unregistered, are required to continue to pay GST, while the psychologists and social workers and occupational therapists who are providing almost identical services, they don't have to charge GST. And for the psychologists and mental health social workers, they also get to claim a Medicare rebate. So they're not paying GST, and they get a Medicare rebate for pretty much exactly the same service offering.
Yeah, exactly. And that has lasted for 20 years. And counsellors and psychotherapists are still knocking on the door.
I was going to be asking you about challenges and lost opportunities. So that sounds like one of those. I wonder if there was any other challenges and lost opportunities that might come to mind from that time.
Well, as I said, losing the analysts, I think, was a not so much a lost opportunity. It was almost certain to happen because they saw themselves as very different, you know, and they saw their training as very different. But that was a loss, you know, a serious loss. The ACA unwillingness to join was a loss, I think, and I think lessened the power of the word of counsellors and psychotherapists, because they were split amongst themselves for a long time. I mean, then Ione Lewis was one of the people who worked with ACA to try and get some kind of working together, and that eventually did get established, but there's still a difference, I think. But the GST question still remains symbolically. I mean, it's a symbol of things, really. This gets recognized as health. This doesn't.
That's right. And there's a whole question around what constitutes a health profession, and are psychotherapy and counselling health professions, maybe in our own eyes, but what about in the eyes of the world? So that's something that we continue to work on.
And we have to let that be known, and we have to work at making that voice heard until people take it on. And there's some signs of that happening, but
we're now a full member of the Australian Health Professions Australia, AHPA. The ACA isn't a full member; they're an associate member. They don't meet the AHPA standards, and we're also going through the necessary steps to join the National National Alliance of Self-Regulated Health Professions, which is a higher standard again. And so, it would seem to be a good pathway or a strategic pathway to follow, to be recognised by the health professions themselves as a health profession. And if there's a group of allied health professionals that are self-regulated, that we are recognised as part of that group. So we join other groups that help us to be recognised as the health professions that we are.
And my statement to that is, that's fantastic. That's what we've been trying for a long time. And
Any other in terms of what's happened since your years of as president, any other observations on the successes or failures of subsequent iterations of PACFA presidents and boards? You talked about Ione Lewis and the putting together of the Australian Register of Counsellors and Psychotherapists. Any other observations you'd care to make?
Well, I don't really much, Nigel, because as it turned out, there was when I'd finished as president, I'd been around for a long time, and there's a limit to how long you can be around for. So there wasn't much contact after that, I think where I think there'd been a lot of this work with creativity and all that, and now it was coming into organizational, and so there wasn't much linking backwards at that stage.
And PACFA does have written into its constitution limitations on how long anyone can be on the board or be president. What are your reflections on that? Looking back, do you think that was healthy and helpful?
I think it was healthy and helpful. I doubt that it needs it as much these days. But I mean, we've got another issue that I think that there's less volunteering goes on, and so people being available for board positions and all that is actually less than it was, but and again, I keep thinking of the difference between the kind of creative organizing that goes on, and then the organizing and setting up and practice. They're two different activities. Sometimes the same people have to do them, but they're different activities,
different skill sets.
Different skill sets, absolutely.
What would you say, so looking forwards from where you are now and where you see the profession being now, what would you say is your vision for the future of counselling and counsellors, and maybe even psychotherapy and psychotherapists too?
Well, I'm getting close to retiring, so the short answer is I'm not sure. But like the longer answer is, well, it is important that psychology and social work don't own counselling and psychotherapy, and I think that continuing to develop the identity of counsellors and psychotherapists, which occurs in the United Kingdom certainly, and occurs in the United States, we have to work to make that a part of the reality in Australia. I think that's really important. And I think, when you think about mental health, like a lot of it actually these days is managed by nurses, because they're the ones that are there, and they've got a certain amount of training. But and there's nothing wrong with that. That's useful. But it is possible that a whole lot of very important mental health issues, are managed at various levels. Like in the psychology field at the minute, there's endless writing about trauma, and that's appropriate because trauma is what it is, and it gets in the road of so many endeavors. But a lot of work is not totally based on trauma. A lot of work is based on all sorts of difficulties, whether they belong to the past or belong to the present, and that aspect of counseling and psychotherapy's got to get recognized.
Absolutely. There's definitely a place for psychotherapists and counselors throughout the mental health workforces, the disability workforces, the sort of the repairing of harms done by traffic accidents and workers' compensation. There's spaces for counselors.
All of that,
throughout all that. Aged care is also a looming.
There's a lot of that. Aged care victims, etc. So a lot of that has a lot of progress has been made.
What do you see as being the current and future challenges and opportunities for counselling and psychotherapy and for PACFA?
Well, I'm trying not to answer just in generalized terms, but I think that you do have to have the general, that there has to be a clearer recognition of counselling and psychotherapy as having a place, and they probably will name some things differently, but that there is a capacity to assist hugely in what these days we're calling mental health issues. I mean, that's almost new words that we have to define also. But I'd be hoping that voice is heard and that politicians are hearing that you don't have to be a trauma expert to work in mental health, and that a lot of work needs to be done at the immediate level as well as at the level of trauma and the so-called diagnosable mental illnesses. There's a lot of mental health to be focused on as opposed to the focus on mental ill health. Well, there's a lot of talk at the minute about the medical model taking over, and that the better thinking and study is saying, we don't want to only use Medicare. Oh, sorry, start again. We don't only want to use medical language.
There's a whole other way of understanding what people experience without needing to resort to medical language.
Yeah, exactly.
And as psychotherapists and counsellors, we do that all day, every day. We're listening to people explore their worlds. In fact, I had a client this morning and she used the word depression in relation to her husband, and I just responded, well, how about we just start with sadness and go from there, because I'm pretty sure if we ask him if he's depressed, he's going to tell us no, but if we ask him if he's sad, he might have a different answer.
Exactly. Yeah.
He was very sad.
Yeah, well,
and have been for a long time.
Yeah. That's probably enough for today. I'm probably not coherent anymore.
No, it was great. Thank you so much. I feel like we're done. We covered the span. Covered all the questions I wanted to cover. I'm sorry that I don't have the means to do the research. I don't have access to the historical records, and nobody in the office has the resources to be able to spend the time going through them. So we make do with what we have. As you said, volunteers. It's a big thing to volunteer to be president of a national professional association with almost 10,000 members.
Good to be in touch and good to do it. And I'm just sorry I didn't have. Well, I don't have the history there. Anyway, okay.
Thanks,
take care.
Ron.
All right.
Care.
Good to be in touch.
You too.